Thought Bubble Audio.
Look, up in the sky!
You will never find the more wretched hive of scum and villainy.
Welcome to Beer with Geeks with Tim and Frank.
Who are you?
I'm Batman.
I am Iron Man.
Your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man.
Hi, Christopher. I'm Nero.
My name is Inigo Montoya.
You're a wizard, Harry.
A couple of guys with a couple of beers and a whole lot of pop culture nostalgia.
Make it so, number one.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Beatles.
I named the dog Indiana.
Life finds a way.
I am serious. And don't call me Shirley.
Now sit back and crack open a cold one, because it's time for Beer with Geeks.
It comes in paints.
Shaken, not stirred.
Great Scott!
I was way off. I knew it started with an S, though.
Hi, and welcome to Beer with Geeks, where two geeks geek out with beer. I'm Tim, and with me, as always, is my man who loves to pet some rabbits. It's Frank. How are you today?
I'm good, George. How are you?
Oh, I'm doing okay, Lenny. I'm doing okay. Now, what did I tell you? Tell me what I told you. Tell me. Tell me what I told you. Tell me.
Not to squeeze them too hard or something?
Yeah, close enough. Yeah, sure. Why not? Yeah, close enough.
Be
now, Frank, hello. How are you, Frank?
I'm good. Days Without Rabbit Incident 5.
Days Without Rabbit Incident 5. They really needed that sign on the farm, didn't they? Oh, indeed. Frank, it's so lovely to see you. Could you tell me what beer you're drinking?
Yes, sir. I am finishing up my stash of Maine Beer Company exclusives, brewery exclusives. And I can't honestly remember if I have mentioned this one on air yet. I know I talked about dinner a couple of weeks ago, but this is their barrel series, barrel program, I guess they call it. It's a wild ale. It's sort of a farmhouse ale. Again, you know, the sours are not my usual, but nice. And so it is a farmhouse ale that is aged with in a French oak red wine barrel, and it's got wild yeast, which is why it's called wild ale, I guess. And it's great. It's
how wild is it? Like go out and party on a Saturday night, wild yeast?
It's yeah. It's like yeast that you know picked that went to Miami because they knew it was a party school. Like that's
gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah,
that kind of yeast.
It is a party school. I don't care what anybody says. Yeah.
So,
very few schools are not party schools. I don't know what people are talking about. There's always a party to be found at some school.
This is true.
That's part of the college experience. Partying.
It is.
Frank, we're not here. We're not.
It's part of the experience.
We're not here to talk about partying, Frank. Though we're here to talk about yeast. So if you could tell me more, if you could tell me more about that, please.
I'm good.
Okay.
Unless you want to hear about my bread baking adventures, in which case I'd be happy to talk about my sourdough
I do.
starter.
I mean, you're a couple months out, like out of like Twitter.
I know.
Date,
I know it was trendy in like March, April, and I got into it in like August. But like, I'm getting pretty good.
But
at
isn't that the Frank brand?
Yeah. I do.
Either being
when I want.
either being way ahead of the curve or way behind it. Like
yeah.
The Frank
brand. I'm the guy who's here. Like, guys, have you listened to the Beatles? They're pretty good.
I had a class the other day that didn't know who sang "It's a Hard Day's Night."
Really?
Just so you know,
Yeah.
an entire class, 25 students, had zero idea.
Now, were they familiar with the song but didn't know who it was by?
No, they don't even think they were familiar with the song.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So-
That doesn't surprise me.
Yeah, I think we've reached the point where it's you know, like kind of like Beethoven. You know, like oh yeah, I've heard of Beethoven.
Sure.
But I don't know what any of the songs
he's done.
Right.
But yeah.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Until you go bum 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 bum, and they go, oh yeah,
sure,
I
yeah.
heard that on a commercial once.
You know,
Yep.
it's funny to tie these two stories together. Actually, before I ask you what you're drinking, I was baking this past weekend, and I put on some classical music, and it was Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. And my wife walked in the room, and like as I was finishing up with throwing stuff in the oven, and she was like, "What should we watch on TV?" And I was like, "I don't know, but can we wait? There's like a few minutes left in this music. Can we wait till it finishes? We're getting to the good part." And she's like, "We're getting to the good part? What does that even mean?" And I was like, "It's Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. You'll recognize it. Give it a second." And then we got to the Ode to Joy part. Da, 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 da. And she was like, "Oh, that's what this is. Oh, okay. Yeah, okay, this is the good part." So baking, Beethoven, tied it all together. There you go.
A lot of alliteration happening.
Baking,
in
Beethoven,
your
Beats,
life.
Bears, Battlestar Galactica.
Indeed.
Tim, what is your beer or beverage?
I am drinking a beverage. I'm not drinking a beer this evening. There were a few in my fridge, and I said, no, thank you. I don't want to be full like that. So I moved on, and I dug out the Maker's Mark that you gave me several years ago that I'm still making my way through because it's a monster of a bottle.
So you're still making a mark on it.
Monster. It's making a mark on me, actually. So I'm drinking a Kentucky Straight Bourbon Whiskey, which is what is the bottle you got me, the Maker's Mark. It is delicious. I'm drinking it on the rocks because we record not at 9 o'clock at night, and I haven't had dinner yet. So, nice. But it's good. As I get older, I tend to I find that I'm gravitating more towards this whiskey, this bourbon, Scotch, whatever. It's not a flavor that they're not flavors that always attracted me. It always has to be like cinnamon. The cinnamon one is good. The apple one is good. The honey one is good. I needed another flavor to mellow it all out. But the rocks is doing it for me.
Nice.
Truly. Yeah.
That's interesting that your palate has sort of shifted, evolved over time.
Yeah.
Because I always thought of you as more of a gin guy.
I love gin. I still love it.
Yeah. I know that hasn't gone away, but I knew that gin was sort of your go-to, and that whiskey was like sort of I'll dabble, but not my favorite.
That's right. Yeah, that's really what it is. But like just the past, I don't know, maybe since quarantine, it's been like, well, it's in the house. And I'm gonna refine my flavor. I'm gonna refine, like, how do I want to drink this, right? Because you try.
Yes.
That's the thing with hard alcohol. You try different versions. Like, do I want straight gin? Do I want gin and tonic? Do I want this? Do I want gin and ginger ale? Ginger ale, as it's known in the trade. It's not known. It's not. No. It should be known as that. Capital GIN.
Yes.
Or ale. That's how we should call it now, but we don't. Do you want some gin with just some ginger thrown straight into it, like mixed in the blender? But whiskey makes me feel sophisticated.
There is something sophisticated about it, yeah.
Is it because like rich people used to drink it?
I guess.
Still drink it?
Yeah.
So you can hear it.
I love the sound of it clinking on the glass. Yeah. I don't know. There is something that feels sophisticated about it. It is my spirit of choice. I do enjoy whiskey. I've been more into bourbon. I used to be more of a Scotch guy, but I've been more of a bourbon guy recently. Just like had more of an appreciation for it recently. By recently, I mean the last couple of years, really. But yeah.
I have two serious questions. One not serious question. What is the difference between Scotch, bourbon, and whiskey for those listening who do not know?
Okay, so bourbon, to be considered bourbon, a whiskey has to have, and I am going to use my one lookup because I don't remember the exact numbers here, but there is a percentage of like corn and certain types of malts that need to be in it for it to be considered bourbon. So it needs to be produced in the United States. It needs to be at least 51% corn, and it needs to be aged in new charred oak containers. Those are the three main criteria.
That's bourbon. Okay.
So that, and I learned that at a distillery tour for my friend Vin's bachelor party. They taught us that. I thought, and apparently this is a very common misconception, because this distillery we went to was in Brooklyn. And they make bourbon. And I was under the impression, and many people apparently are, because they mentioned this on the tour, that it had to be made in Kentucky or in a certain area of Kentucky, sort of like the Champagne region of France thing to be called Champagne.
Right.
But apparently that is a misconception that Kentucky is very happy to let spread, because they sell more bourbon that way. But
Oh, it's from Kentucky. We got to sell it. Oh, the fried chicken. It's from Kentucky. We got to eat it. Yeah,
exactly. But it is not. It just needs to be made in the United States. 51% corn, new charred oak barrels, because the charred oak, like the fact that it's like burned and charred, gives it a lot of the caramel color and flavor.
Gotcha. Okay.
If you distill it in like steel containers, you get a clear whiskey.
Okay.
Which is not bourbon, because it's not in charred oak barrels. Whiskey plain, I probably should have started there, is a grain alcohol that is distilled, and it can be made with rye or corn or a number of different grains, or
so
combination thereof.
Question: whiskey is actually a different drink than bourbon, though, right? It's not like an umbrella term, like all Catholics are Christians. But
No,
all
it is.
Christians are Catholics.
Whiskey is this style of these grains when they're distilled give you whiskey.
Okay.
One offshoot of that is bourbon, which is whiskey that is made in the United States, 51% corn and charred oak barrels is a style of whiskey. It's bourbon whiskey. And then Scotch, as far as I know, and without cheating and using another lookup, as far as I know, what makes Scotch whiskey is the fact that it's from Scotland. I know that it is also usually aged in oak barrels, and there is usually like they use smoke from like peat moss, to give it a lot of its flavor. So you'll hear that a lot of scotches are like, oh, this is a very peaty one. This is not so peaty. It depends on if you like that flavor or not. Kind of like, do you like hops or do you not like hops? And do you like less hoppy beer? Do you like more or less hoppy peaty scotches?
Okay.
So that's the thing. Yeah, whiskey is the umbrella term. All scotches are whiskey. All bourbons are whiskey, but not all whiskeys are bourbon, or not all whiskeys are Scotch.
Gotcha. So when I say that I prefer, like, I can't say that I prefer whiskey over Scotch, though, right? Because they are the same. So when somebody, like, if I'm like in an old Western, like, give me a whiskey,
right?
You know, like, they're just like, okay, well, do you want the bourbon or do you want the, you know, like, it's not like I have a whiskey and a bourbon and a Scotch.
It would be like saying I like Diet Coke more than soda. It's like, but Diet Coke is a type of soda, so what are you talking about?
Yeah,
Scotch is a type of
whiskey. Do you want a Pepsi or do you want a Coke?
Right. If you want a Pepsi, you're going to pay for it. So yeah, that's the story there. Yeah, and they can be, like I said, they can be made with lots of different grains, and some of them give you different results. That's like moonshine whiskey is usually very, very high proof and tastes like alcohol. And that's usually because it's made with something really, you know, like maybe it's like a lot of wheat or a lot of rye or a lot of corn, like very, very heavy on one, basically probably whatever the people distilling it had around, and they just made in the bathtub or whatever. So those are the things. And then there's blended whiskeys too, right? Where it's like using different kinds of, maybe it's a little bit of rye and a little bit of wheat and a little bit of barley, and you get a blend of the three. And then you've got single malt, where it's just one. They just use one malt to make it, and that's usually that's more expensive to do, especially if it's with one of the nicer grains, and so it's more expensive, often aged more to give it a more mellow, refined flavor. And those are the ones that are, you know, at the top shelf of the liquor cabinet.
Of course. That all makes sense. So if I say, like, I want a whiskey, that's like saying, like, I want a beer.
Yes.
So, like, what kind?
Often
of
the bar will
want?
have their go-to. If they'll ask you if you order I'll have an old fashioned. They might say, what do you want in it? And then you can say, I want Maker's Mark, or I want
Grandma. No.
Yep. That's it. I want Grandma.
Yeah. I want Grandma.
Or they'll just have, you know, well whiskey, which is just sort of that bar's default, you know, which might be like
might be their top middle shelf,
like bottom shelf, whatever. But yeah, I've been enjoying Bullet Bourbon recently. That's been one. I've been keeping a small bottle of a nice whiskey for sipping. and then like I'll buy a big bottle of a cheaper whiskey for making cocktails. So I'll get like a big thing of Jim Beam for making a cocktail, but then I'll keep a smaller bottle of Bullet or Maker's Mark or something on the side for a night when I'm feeling like sipping some whiskey.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, this was so educational, Frank.
This is our Frank on liquor series.
Okay, I still have my second question. So,
oh my God, that was only your first question. I'm so sorry. We're halfway through this episode. Oh,
okay, so you said that bourbon or whiskey is one of your favorite spirits.
Yes.
But why isn't it ghosts, Frank? Why is it spirits? Why isn't whiskey
I
one of
live
your
in a
favorite
town
ghosts?
that is just crawling with them, so like I'm bored with them. You know, they're
Gotcha. Okay, that makes sense. Okay, yeah, that was it. Okay.
so passe.
I'm only serious, Frank. I want to know the real answer. But okay, so Frank, today's topic here on Beer with Geeks, I've been teaching Of Mice and Men by John Steinbeck. This week, they're just my little kiddies are just in chapter 2 right now, so they haven't gotten to the big stuff yet, truly. So, but it dawned on me that Of Mice and Men by John Steinbeck is it's so relevant to 2020 at this moment right now, and if you haven't read it, you need to read it like at this very moment. And that's kind of why I wanted to talk about it today, because we don't talk about books. Books are for nerds, and this is a geek show. Even though if you want to hear me talk about books on the regular, you can listen to the Read Up podcast, in which I talk about books intellectually and stuff, which I actually might just take this segment and make it a Read Up episode.
I was going to suggest that.
So
yeah,
one.
Go for it.
So it's okay. You saw through my nefarious purpose. So Of Mice and Men, for people who don't know, it's about these two guys, Lenny and George, and they're migrant workers in California during the Great Depression. And so, and Lenny is slow, and George is his friend and helper, and they've known each other since they were kids. And George kind of sees it as his responsibility to take care of Lenny. Right, that's kind of the crux of the story. Mm-hmm. So here's why it's important, Frank. Migrant workers, still a thing.
Still relevant.
Book takes place in the Great Depression. 25% of Americans were out of work. I think we're at 18% of Americans are out of work right now, something like that. And so we're close. I think we did the math out today. We're like 10 million people off or something like that.
When you look at the actual hard numbers?
When you look at the hard numbers, yeah.
Wow.
So, but you're talking the population of America in the 30s versus now. So we're probably closer than we would care to admit to ourselves. And so there's a lot of that going on. But it's also, Of Mice and Men is really also about how are we treating other people? And what are we, like... And it's all people. It's not even just how George treats Lenny or the people on the farm treat Lenny, who is, obviously not diagnosed. Lenny's not diagnosed. He's slow, and that's all you pretty much know, right? And so, but he's not much, we're pre-diagnoses, sort of, not really, but, not the level that we are today.
Right. They didn't have the level of sophistication around mental health issues that we have today. They didn't have the understanding, or frankly, they didn't care enough to
right
to differentiate.
Right. And so, but the thing about stories is that illness or handicaps or anything like that, they go unnamed because they're symbolic, right? Forrest Gump is just Forrest Gump.
Right.
He doesn't have anything particular about him except that he's slow, because the point is that he's simple to show you the power of simplicity and to and what that can do for the world if you just stop overthinking things. And so and Lenny is very much in that same vein, right? There's a kind of a joke about it in Tropic Thunder with Robert Downey Jr. and Ben Stiller, and I won't repeat it here if you haven't seen the movie, but there's a whole thing about acting that type of part, but in stories it's all symbolic, and so it's about treating the other. But then how does Lenny see Candy on the farm who's missing his hand, or Crooks, who's a black man working on the farm who's got a crooked back and who has to live in his own room away from everybody else. He's not allowed to play cards because he's black. And it's about Curly's wife, who's not even named. She's just Curly's wife.
Yeah.
And everyone just assumes that she's like a slut, just like because she's like, I can't find my husband, so I'm bored on this farm, so I'm going to talk to all of you people. And they're like, you're a slut. You're like, what is the matter with all of you? Like, what is the matter with all of you? And all these things are still relevant. Every single thing that I just said is still relevant.
Honestly, that is, I haven't read this book since high school, to be honest with you. But I remember it being a very easy and quick read.
It's on like 107 pages.
Okay, there you go.
Like, it's not, I read it yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that should tell you everything you need to know.
Right.
I read it yesterday on a Monday, like after work. Like, you can breeze through it. Actually, and if you're really not a reader, the audiobook is read by Gary Sinise. So, who played George in the movie in the 90s. John Malkovich was Lenny. But these are things that we still need to talk about, and there are things that we need to act on, because we can talk all we want, and then I'll wait for you to talk, to paraphrase John Mulaney. But, but talking will only get you so far. And I mean, of course, it's a podcast, so we're not going to do anything but talk. But yeah, when did you read Of Mice and Men? And what you said it was easy, but like, what were your reactions to it? Like, because it matters how old you are.
Yeah,
what's going to hit you?
I was 16 or 17 when I read it. I was either a junior, either a sophomore or a junior. I remember a lot of focus on the sort of gentle giant aspects of Lenny. I remember that being a major thing we focused on. It's considered a novella, I guess, right? At that length.
Yes. Yeah. It's a novella. I mean, people generally don't make that distinction in a non-literary world.
Right.
They're like, it's a book, therefore it's a novel.
It's a book,
right?
Yeah,
it is a book.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. But I remember it being so talking about him as sort of a gentle giant, the rabbits, it really is the thing. Like, I always remember, like, what about the rabbits, George? I always remember that as the thing about him and the rape accusation against Lenny, when it's clear to the reader, or at least this is how I remember it, clear to the reader that, like, Lenny couldn't, if he wanted, like,
That's right.
would never dream of doing hurting anybody.
Wouldn't even know what that means. Right. That sexual desire inside Lenny is like is non-existent.
And he's
because
such
all he
a
wants
gentle...
to do is pet. He just wants to pet something soft. So like, that dress looked soft, so I want to touch it.
Yeah.
I want to pet the puppy. I want to pet the rabbit. I
Yes.
want to pet the mouse.
Yes.
Of Mice and Men, he's got a dead mouse in his pocket in the first chapter.
Yes.
Right. He is as simple as a mouse is kind of the, what we're getting at here. So right. So here's that gentleness, right? So if Lenny is not you, that's kind of the whole point, right?
Mm-hmm.
Lenny is not you. You're George.
Yeah.
You the reader are George, because Lenny probably couldn't read Of Mice and Men. Like, that's just what, like, he's the capacity of about an 8-year-old. So he's like, he just does what he does. He hears what he wants to hear. If it's about food, he's going to remember it. If it's about the rabbits, he's going to remember it. But anything else, like, maybe I won't remember. If George is you, Lenny is that person that you're supposed to watch after. And the question is, like, are you doing that? Are you watching after the person you're supposed to watch after? Are we doing that right now as America? Or if you're in a different country, if you're in Sweden or New Zealand or Finland or China or Iraq or Iran or Nigeria or Kenya or Brazil or Argentina, Costa Rica, what are you doing? Like, what are you doing for that person who's not you? How are you watching after them? And that's like what that's what Of Mice and Men is really about, how you see other people and what you do for them. But then it's relevant because we're basically in that same situation all over again. People traveling around, not having jobs. They want to live off the land. That's Lenny and George's big thing. They want to live off the fat of the land, right? We're going to have our own place and not answer to anybody. And like, that's like my wife's dream. Never mind like anybody anywhere. She's like, like I got the garden in the corner, and like we didn't have to buy a vegetable all summer because I don't want to say we, because I did zero work apart from eating them. But like she did it all. We didn't have to pay the man, Whole Foods, for for 3 months for our vegetables.
Mm-hmm.
That's the dream.
Yeah.
Right? So, like, what are we doing? Frank, your thoughts. Continue. I might have interrupted you. I'm not sure. No, I might have had more. I might have had more makers than I realized.
This is the secret to read up and to.
I wish that was the secret to read up. I wish it was. It should be. Yeah.
So I remember, or I like what you're saying. I'm gonna switch. What you were saying actually makes me think of something. So, yeah, are we doing what we're supposed to do? Are we looking out for our neighbor, for our fellow person? Not necessarily in this, like in the case of Lenny and George. George is Lenny's friend, and so he feels a desire, an obligation, yes, but he wants to care for his friend because he feels like his friend has been sort of put in his care. I guess what you're saying makes me think about, more broadly, not all of us have someone who was put in our care expressly. But do we look out for one another? Do we look out for our fellow man, our fellow person? Even if they were not expressly put in our care, like in a legal sense or anything like that, right? Like he's not legally Lenny's guardian or anything like that. He's just their friends, and they're like they're just a pair. They're
just a pair. They're like a fraternity unto themselves. Yeah. He is just they're looking out for one another. And because Lenny does look out for George, he does want to protect him in some way, but in a lot of ways George is just the guy that Lenny looks up to. In the first chapter, like Lenny tries to copy George lying by the river. Like he always adjusts himself. He Steinbeck talks about like Lenny looking up and being like, "Oh, am I lying the correct way? Is my hat like at the jaunty angle it should be to be the most comfortable?" Because that's how George is right now. Like we've had people in our lives that we do that for. You're like, how's that person sitting? Like I want to sit like that.
Sure, somebody you want to mirror, and yeah.
And so the question is like, and then in a moral sense, then like we should be Lenny at that moment. Like we should be mirroring. Are we mirroring the person that is watching out for us? Like who's like, are you watching for others, but who's watching out for you?
Right.
So yeah.
Right.
So
who's looking out for you, and are you? I guess are you reciprocating? Are you doing that in return for them? And Lenny's also like a really a sort of a role model in the sense of like being simple and humble and but still
he's almost non-combative. Actually.
Yeah.
Because Curly's there. Curly's the boxer, and he gets up in Lenny's face, and he's like, "Oh, you were, doing this and doing that and all this stuff," and he starts pounding on Lenny, punching him, breaks his nose, like or whatever, all this stuff. And Lenny doesn't fight back. Lenny doesn't fight back against the aggressor until George says, "It's okay. Like, you need to defend yourself." But he doesn't immediately hop to, like, 10 because then Lenny breaks his hand, like, with nothing. Like, bam, sorry, Curly's hand. Like, you're done. And then it's, like, symbolic because he was, like, quote, saving that hand for his wife and blah, 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 and all this grossness. And Lenny destroys that in almost his simplicity in being like, it's over now. Like, your aggression is done. And I think that's another thing that we need to take away. Like that your aggression is not helping.
Yeah.
It's not helping. Aggression gets nowhere. So can you just calm down? Like, wouldn't that just be great?
What do you think about a theme with Lenny that I remember is that it's with the rabbits, and then with is it with Curly's wife or
Curly's wife? Yep. Mm-hmm.
He doesn't know his own strength, right? Mm-hmm. He doesn't know his own strength, and
That's right.
in his sort of chasing beauty or chasing softness or chasing,
that's right.
You know, in sort of a King Kong way, he's
kind of
chasing something beautiful, and that ends up being his undoing.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
What are your thoughts on that, and like how does that relate to, you know, our duty to one another, or just does that tie to 2020 in some way, do you think, or just whether in 2020 specifically, or just more generally something that we can all, you know, take away from that as a way we want to be more like, or a cautionary tale, something we want to be careful of?
This is not to demonize Curly's wife, like so don't misconstrue. So, but spoilers for a book that's decades old and you probably read in high school. Lenny kills Curly's wife. He shakes her, he snaps her neck by accident, because he doesn't want the dream to be taken away from him, right? And so, like, because if she talks, he feels that she talks, then he won't be able to pet the rabbits. He won't get the farm. He won't get what he wants. So he's overtly aggressive to protect himself, even though he doesn't know what that's going to do to somebody else. I think that's a very 2020 thing. You know, I don't know what my actions are going to do to somebody else, and so maybe you should be calm. Maybe you shouldn't react in that way. And that's kind of the lesson that George keeps trying to tell Lenny. Like, you don't know your own strength.
Yes.
You don't know. So it's Lenny's is literally his strength. But for people, it's like you don't know the power of your words.
Yeah, that's true.
You don't know, or the power of your action. Like not doing something, not wearing your mask, not like doing like that says something.
Not voting.
That's not voting. Though these are things that have power, and you think that they don't, but they do. And look at the consequences of what happens when you kind of subject the world to that power. And so, you know, and voting obviously has its own power, but it's a united power. It's the power of the people. It's not individualistic. It's not an individual, selfish movement. And so, like, not voting is selfish. Voting is unselfish. You're part of the community by voting, by not keeping it to yourself. And Beer with Geeks, we don't get political here. I don't know how this became political, but it did. So wear your mask.
We're not talking about candidates. It's patriotic. Like,
that's right. This is being a citizen. I don't like whoever you're voting for. Be a citizen. Like, you know, and
do your
I
civic
think
duty. Do vote. Do fulfill your obligation to do jury duty? Like, those are all things that a citizen does.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. I mean, really do jury duty, because you can get fined for not. I mean, really do it. Yeah. I mean, just
taxes,
to save yourself some money, pay your taxes. Yeah. You know, just the huge. You know. So, don't break fire hydrants. I don't know, whatever things people are.
Don't yell fire in a crowded theater. I don't know.
Right. I don't know. Yeah. Yell.
JK, there's no more crowded theaters.
Yeah, just yell other things like boo, you know.
Get off the stage, Frank and Tim. You know, things like that.
Yeah, boo, Ray Skywalker. You know, like, I don't know, whatever you're yelling in a theater. Yeah, I don't know. So anyway, people should read Of Mice and Men, because it's really not. It's so much bigger than migrant workers in 1930s Northern California. It's about our way of life right now, and whether you know it or not. Like, think about who you are and how you're treating somebody else, and what are the consequences of not thinking. I think that's part of Lenny's story. What are the consequences of letting your emotions get the better of you? and how does that really, what does that do for the world, and then what does that do for you in the end? Like for Lenny, it ends up with a bullet in his head. Like that's so spoilers again for people who have not read Of Mice and Men, but like that's it doesn't end well. So anyway, yeah, that's this extremely dark Beer with Geeks. I think it got dark because Frank's lights aren't on, and so I've been watching his room get darker and darker as like it started with bright sun, and then like now you're almost completely enshrouded in shadow. Oh, there you are. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm sorry that I started this episode with it was more of Scotch and Bourbon than Of Mice and Men, but
I don't care. I mean, that's fine. I mean, we it's like a good sermon. You start them with the joke, and then you slam it home with the what you should be doing,
the message.
moral message.
Yeah,
like a Mr. Rogers episode.
Yes.
I'm gonna start with changing my sweater.
Yeah,
and then by the end, you're gonna learn that you should treat people nicely. Like, you should treat people equally and the same and be good to everyone. So there you go.
Cool. Do you want me to tell people where they can find us while you change back into your shoes and put on your sweater?
Yes, please. It's cold.
Yeah, okay. If you want to hear more literary analysis like this, you should go to readuppodcast.com because Tim does it pretty regularly. And sometimes with guests, often without guests, and often very, very snippet, short, digestible episodes.
2, 3, 4 minutes max, unless I have a guest. Usually,
super like bite-sized episodes. So really, really fun, and great to just download a bunch of. If you want to go through the catalog and download a bunch of about books that you've read or books that you're interested in. It's great, and you usually don't get spoilery, which is nice. If you haven't read it, it's a good way to see like, oh, would I like this? Let me listen to someone talk about it for 3 minutes and decide if I want to read this book or not, which I appreciate. So Read Up Podcast, but you can find that as well as Beer with Geeks at thoughtbubbleaudio.com. Of course, beerwithgeeks.com is also where you'll find the show. Patreon.com/thoughtbubbleaudio is so important because it does help us to keep these shows alive, keep them going. It supports us through these times. So thank you to everyone who supports us there. Thought Bubble Audio on Patreon. You can also find the show at Beer with Geeks on Twitter, beerwithgeeks@gmail.com, and be sure to leave us a rating or review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google, wherever you like to get your podcasts. We're everywhere, on your smart speakers, whatever, wherever you want to find us, we are there. So hit us up in all those places. Thanks so much for listening. Thanks so much for supporting us. Thanks so much for telling a friend. And thanks so much for putting up with me talk about whiskey and its various forms of Scotch and bourbon.
Well, I mean, I asked that question for other people. I obviously knew the answer, and I wasn't asking for myself, not in any particular way. But I'm so glad that I know so much more than I did when I started this episode. Let me just say that. So, thank you for saying all those lovely things. Thank you for being my friend. Until next time, cheers.